Hello everyone, Amanda here with Handmade Not Hallmark. Today I've got this cute scene card featuring some Hello Bluebird stamps and dies, as well as a lot of Copic coloring. So if Copic coloring's your thing, hang on tight because we got a lot of it. So I'm using the Singing in the Rain stamp set. I'm also using the Country Roads stamp background. I am using the Charlie's ABCs dies, as well as the A2 stitch stacks, which I didn't end up using. I'm also using the Doodlebug Buffalo Check and Wood Grain Rainbow Pack. I also have some cardstock here I'm going to use as my base. I didn't use that darker cardstock. So we're going to get right into the coloring because this is a very long video, if you can see by the timestamp, and I did a lot of pre-stamping. Now, like I said, this is all Copic coloring, and I'm going to stick with you guys through this coloring here because I wanted to share how I made this background scene. I had a lot of fun making this. I struggled with, I did actually several tests. I colored the stamp set probably 3 times. But what I started with is my sky, and I started with C1 to kind of get a ground color put in because I wanted to go with kind of a stormy sky. I wanted the background piece to be very kind of gloomy and dark, and that way that my sentiment would stand out against that, with, the rainbow colors and everything else like that. So again, I'm just laying down some color here with the C1. I'm going to go in with a C3 and a C5 to add in some cloud shapes. Now I wanted it to look like I said, a stormy sky. I wanted it to look kind of, with some streaky clouds. I was thinking about a stormy sky in my head, and this is what I came up with. And like I said, I did a couple of test colorings. I had stamped this panel, and I ended up stamping this huge black spot right in the center, and I used that to practice on, and I'm really glad that I did because it helped me create this card, and that way I wasn't trying to film my first time doing this and end up messing it up a bunch of times. So if it's the first time you're coloring something, I highly suggest practicing first because that really helped me. So again, I'm just going through and making this look like a stormy sky, and I absolutely love the way that this turned out. Next, I'm going to go in and start coloring in all of the hills, and I struggled with this too, figuring out what colors I wanted because I don't really have a whole lot of greens. So I stuck with the YG67, YG63, and I added in YG25. And I didn't think that the YG25 would blend in very well, but my YG61 is actually running out, and I don't have a refill for it yet. And so I decided to throw in that YG25, and it worked out perfectly. And you can tell here, before I started coloring this grassy bit, I tried a different color green, and I didn't like it at all. It was too bright for the scene that I was going for. Again, I'm trying to go for kind of a gloomy kind of scene here. So again, I'm just going in with my YG67 to start to get my shadow areas in, and then I'm going to start blending in with my YG63 and finishing off with the YG25. And like I said, this Copic coloring, it took me a long time. It probably took me about 2 days to color this whole card because I really wanted to take my time. I did a lot of practicing with color combinations and things that I liked, things that I didn't like. And I knew that with this card, because it had taken me a while and I was really proud of it and I wanted to share how I colored it, that I knew that I wanted to talk to you guys about it instead of putting on music like I normally do. And I'm just so thrilled how this turned out. Like I said, I'm glad that I practiced, and I highly suggest that, especially if this is a new stamp that you're not used to, or you're not really sure how you want to color it or what kind of scene you're going for. Practicing really does help. So again, I'm just going in with those same colors, and my YG63 is starting to die as well because I've had these markers since I started, and they are definitely running out, and they're the only greens that I used. I use these greens for everything because they were my absolute favorite. I'm trying out some new greens. I'm trying to get into the actual G colors, and I'm trying to find color combinations that I like. This one's been my favorite for so long that it's kind of hard to find something different. Now that I have all of the grass colored in, I'm going to go in and do the pathway. And I wanted the pathway to be a little bit lighter than the tree. Again, still going with that kind of darker scene. And so I went in with E21, E23, and E25. And I ended up, the E21 kind of gets covered up quite a bit in this pathway, but I wanted to have it as a kind of a nice base color. I ended up using more of the E23 and the E25 here, just so I could have that that darker look that I was going for. I was thinking of, if it's raining, that pathway is going to look pretty wet. And if you live on a dirt road like I do, when the dirt road gets wet, it gets darker. So that's kind of where I was going with this, because I planned on adding some rain in the background of this card, and I was so thrilled on how it turned out. I was just kind of playing around with some things, and when we get to that part, I'll talk to you guys a little bit more. So once I had it all colored in, I decided to go in with some stippling or some dot detail just to kind of add some texture to that pathway. I know that there was some little rocks along the edges and things. They ended up getting covered up by my character, so I just decided to add in that stippling. For the fence here and the little house, I decided to go with E74 and E79. Oh, I'm sorry, we're getting into the tree here. So the tree, I used a lot of colors just because it was such a large image and I wanted to get a lot of that detail to come through. So I started with E31 as my base coat. Again, I just wanted to get some ink on the paper to get started. And then I went in with E59 and I went across all of the lines that the artist had put in on this tree, because I wanted to kind of accentuate and accent those lines that she put in, as well as adding some shading to the tree. So I just went over each of the lines just to kind of accent them a little bit more, add some depth to the tree. Now again, you could use any Copic colors that you like. You could go with any colors, but again, I really like this combination, especially for this tree. Now I could have easily used less shades. The shade I'm going in with is E39, just to kind of fill in those extra areas and accent all of those shaded spaces. And I could have gotten a lighter tree. So maybe if I do maybe of a spring scene or a daytime one, nice and sunny, I'll go with a lighter. I won't use as many shades on this tree. Maybe I'll just stick with the E31, E33, and E35. That color I just used was E37, and now I'm going in with E35, and I'm going right over top of all of those areas, and so you can see that the E31 kind of gets all covered up. But I really like the way that this tree turned out. You can still see a lot of the detail. And then I went back over the lines with the E59 just to pull those depths back out, and I really love this tree. These oak trees are my absolute favorite. Next, I'm going in with the tops of the trees. Now there's not a whole lot here, but I wanted the greens to match, so I just went in with my YG61. I squeezed out as much ink as I could, got some ink down, and then I went in with my YG63 and I just did some stippling. I just did lots of little dots to make it look like there was more leaves than that are drawn on here. And then I did the same with my E67 just to fill in all of those leaves and give them some texture and some depth. And then finally I went in with that YG25, and I like the way that this turned out because it's a little bit lighter than the grass, but it kind of really rounds out the scene. So again, for the little house here, I went in with E79 and E74 for the roof and for the little chimney stack there. And then for the house itself, I went in with BG18 and BG15. I wasn't really sure on what color I wanted to do this house. I had tossed around a couple of ideas. I had colored it in with a blue color. I've colored it in with red, but I felt like the teal really kind of went with this scene that I was going for. And then I just colored in the little window with a YR24. The tops of the mushrooms, I just used some red colors. I used R27, R29, and R59. Okay, so we're done with our background scene. I'm so sorry that this is going really fast, but this video was really, really long and I had to kind of speed it up a little bit. So we're getting into the coloring of this here. I wanted her to have a nice red umbrella, so I'm just using the same R colors. I'm using R27, R29, and R59 to give it some nice shadow and some depth. And again, I had tossed around doing like a rainbow colored umbrella, but I wanted my sentiment to be the only rainbow colored item on my card. And then for the little stick here, I'm just using an E79. And as well for her boots, I'm using an E79 and E74. I wanted them to be kind of like a grayish brown. For her pants, I am using B24 and B21 to give her some nice blue jeans. Shading in some, areas. I didn't really have a particular light source here. I was just thinking maybe that the light was going to be facing at her. I'm not very good at light sourcing. I try really, really hard to, pick a light source and go with it, but I end up just kind of winging it and coloring it my own way. For her little rain jacket here, I decided to do a teal colored rain jacket. So I'm using BG18, BG15, and BG13. I tossed around the idea on jackets. I did so many, and I had a yellow one, I had a pink one, but I decided I really like the teal color. I'd never seen anybody do a teal colored rain jacket. I've seen lots of yellow jackets. I've seen lots of pink ones, and so I thought maybe this teal color would be a nice change. So I'm just going back in with that darker color, kind of intensifying those shadow areas and really saturate the paper with that color, and it really helps with the detail and the depth. And I really like these BG colors. They're some of my absolute favorite colors. And then for the collar and the cuffs, I just went in with the darkest color, the BG18. For her little shirt, I did Y13 and Y15. And then we're going to get into coloring her skin and her hair. So for her skin, I am using E00 and E11. I wanted her to be nice and pale. I was kind of picturing this little girl here as myself, and the little ducks were my kids. Because I have 4 boys, and they love to play in the rain, so I figured it was perfect. And I used a little R20 on her cheeks. And we're going to color in her hair. I used E31, E33, and E35 for her hair. I'm still getting used to coloring hair. I'm not very good at it. I haven't done a lot of people. As you can see from my videos in the past, that people are a rarity for me. And Hello Bluebirds people are so sweet and adorable that this set, I couldn't resist it because the little girls in it were so amazing. So I'm hoping to get a little bit more practice in coloring hair. I'm just going into the areas that the artist drew to add some shadow and some shading. Get that all colored in. And I made this card, and the next 3 days it rained. So I thought maybe I had a bad omen because it just rained and rained the whole time during the holiday weekend. I don't know how it was for you guys, but it absolutely just poured here. It was miserable. For my little ducks here, I'm using Y13, Y15, and Y17. And then for their little beaks and their little feet, I used YR24. I think these ducks are so sweet. The little guy at the very top, he's my absolute favorite. I just love these because you can use these little ducks in other cards as well. I'm so excited for them. They are so sweet. Now that all the coloring is all finished, I'm going to use the coordinating dies to cut them all out, and then we'll be able to get into the actual finishing of this card. I'm telling you guys, I had to speed up this Copic coloring because it did take me a really, really long time to color it, but it was so worth it. It was so relaxing to, get through this coloring and to really get my idea down on paper. And it turned out exactly the way that I had pictured it in my mind. As soon as I saw this set, I knew it's what I wanted to do. So there's all of our images cut out. I love the little dies. They're so great. The next thing I'm doing is I'm going to assemble my rainbow letters. So I decided to use the wood grain rainbow colors from this Doodlebug paper pack. And I also cut out some white cardstock as kind of just a reinforcer because this pattern paper is pretty thin and I wanted the letters to be pretty substantial. So I just took those white backers and the colored pieces, and I used my multimedia mat and glued them all together. I must be a glutton for punishment because I've used these letters twice now, but it's so worth it. I love them, and it is kind of time consuming to get these all cut out, but I really love the effect in the end. Now that that part was finished, I kind of did like an assembly line. I did one thing and then I did another thing, set it off to the side. Did one thing, set it off to the side. And then that way I could just come together and assemble the card. That's all I had to do. Now I'm going to take the sentiment from this same Singing in the Rain stamp set. It says, "After the storm comes the rainbow." And I just wanted the after the storms part. So what I did is I lined up the stamp on some black cardstock and I masked off the scripty rainbow portion because I'm going to do the rainbow obviously in that pattern paper. So I just took some masking tape and I stamped off the area that I didn't want to have any ink on. Now I've seen where people have cut their stamps, or they put a sticky note down, or they stamp it and then they wipe it off. However you want to do it, this is a great way to get more use out of your stamps. I don't really like to cut my stamps apart, but if I have to, then I will. So I stamped that down using some Versamark ink, and I'm going to be using some Brutus Monroe Alabaster White embossing powder. And I'm just going to sprinkle that over top of my stamped image here. And anywhere that I might have picked up some adhesive, or I had some extra stamping, I just kind of brushed it away with this dry brush, the areas that I didn't want any embossing powder, and it worked out perfectly. Now I know the sentiment isn't quite centered on itself, and that was okay because I knew I wanted to cut the sentiment out. I didn't want to have a whole big like chunky black sentiment strip at the top of my card. So I knew that even though this was kind of off center from each other a little bit, I was okay with that because I was going to trim it out anyway. Now I'm going to take my fine detail scissors and I'm going to trim out this sentiment. I'm going to leave just enough around the sentiment that it kind of gives it like a black border. I've seen several stampers do this technique before, and I really liked it. I liked how you could fussy cut out your sentiments. I never really thought about that until I'd seen somebody do it, and I was like, that's a really neat idea. If you don't have the dies for it, just fussy cut it. It turns out great. Now we're ready to finish up our background here. So this is where I wanted to add the rain, and again I experimented, I played around with different techniques, and I landed on this one. I took the little raindrops from the same Singing in the Rain stamp set, and I wanted to stamp those in clear embossing ink, or powder, excuse me. And I wanted them to be pretty random, so I used the trio of raindrops, and then I used the single raindrop. And I just went through and stamped it randomly, kind of spacing them out all over the scene. And I love this. This was so much fun to do. I'm just using some Ranger clear embossing powder, and I love it. You can tilt it in the light and you can see it. Now whenever you heat it up, you're not going to be able to see it very well now unless you turn it into the light, and that's what I was looking for. You can't always see raindrops. You have to kind of look at them as the light's coming through them, so that was kind of my idea. And I just went through and filled in some extra spots. I apologize if my head gets in the way. Like I said, it's kind of hard to see that clear embossing powder once it's all warmed up. Just a couple more spots, get those all warmed up, and we'll be ready to finish up this card. I wanted to make sure that I had enough going on in the background, that it wasn't just a plain flat, kind of stormy scene. I really wanted to make it look like it was raining. And like I said, I played around quite a bit with my, my practice piece. I looked at here, I thought, well, maybe I could draw some streakiness in with some Copics. That'll kind of get me something in the back, but I wanted something to happen up in the foreground. So I did go through with my Copic marker in C3 and go through and add some of those streaky details. And then I'm taking my Stardust gel pen and I am going through and I'm coloring in some of those raindrops that I added. Just going through all the way down the card panel to add that shimmer in those raindrops, and I noticed that I had missed a few spots on my tree branch, so I just went in with my Copics and filled that back in. Now that I'm going to go through, and I love this technique. I'm definitely going to have to use this again with some more rainy scenes. Once I had all of those filled in, I just took that same shimmer pen and I did streaky marks to make it look like more raindrops, because not all raindrops in a rainstorm are all the same size. So, and this turned out I was so pleased with the way this turned out, and I loved it so much. And it just added some more shimmer, which everybody loves shimmer, and it made it look like rain. I was so thrilled. Now that that's all finished up, we can finish up the assembly. Now I'm going to get my letters here. Oh, I want to add a few more streaks where I felt like I missed some, just to fill it in a little bit more. Now we can assemble the card. So this is actually the second day. Like I said, I worked on this card for 2 days. It took me a really long time, just because I wanted to take my time with it and, you know, really get it right and not have to mess it up, because it does take a lot of Copic markers, and, you know, you want to make sure you've got enough ink, and I didn't want to have to color it several times. And here I just attached it to my card base, and I noticed that it wasn't quite lined up, so I tried trimming it off with my scissors. I got some of it, and then I had to trim off the other side, just to kind of even it out. And I'm going to get out the infamous paper trimmer. This is the paper trimmer that I injured myself on. I am very careful with it now. I'm very conscious of where the blade is and when the blade is down. So, and it has this little locking mechanism, so every time I'm done using it, I lock it up and I hide it so I don't end up cutting my hand again. So now our scene's all squared up, and I really like that this scene goes all the way to the edge of the card. It really adds to that look of it being a nice scene. So I'm going to go through here and arrange my images where I would like them. I thought about, you know, the little ducks are splashing around out in the rain, and she is just waiting for the rain to stop, but she's enjoying herself as well. So get those all placed. I had really thought about doing just 3 ducks, but I have 4 children, so I had to make 4 little ducklings for my 4 guys, and they just loved it. Now I'm going to do some more punishment. I'm going to take some of those Doris 3M foam strips, and I'm going to cover the backs of all of my letters in rainbow and the back of my sentiment. And I'm going to arrange them here. I didn't want it to be a straight line. I wanted it to be kind of haphazard. And that was really the only way I could get it to fit. These letters were a bit big. So I kind of had to fiddle with them to get them all to fit, and I really like the way that it looks. It kind of adds to that whimsy of the card. So I started with attaching the R and the W so that I knew how much space I had in between to work with. Now I probably could have moved the R over a little bit, just to give some more space between the B and the O, but I wasn't too bothered. I did end up moving the N over a little bit because it was a little bit closer than I wanted. So I just scooch that over a little bit, and then I can press them all down nice and firmly once I have it in place. And then we can attach our images here using some Tombow Mono multi-glue. But first I'm going to add some detail. I took my Sakura black gel pen and added some detail to their eyes. I really like doing this with characters and critters. It really kind of gives them some life. And then I took my white gel pen and I went around my little girl's coat here, as well as her cheeks and her hair, because I figured she would get probably a little bit wet while she was out in the rain. Took that same black gel pen and colored in her little buttons, and then I did some highlighting on her umbrella because that would get pretty wet out in the rain, and I love the way that this looked. And now we can attach them to our card here. So I'm just using some Tombow Mono multi-glue. Excuse me, I'm using, some Tombow glue. I've been doing so much gluing, I got so confused. But I'm just using some plain old Tombow glue to attach these. I didn't want to add any dimension to them because I wanted the sentiment to stand out. And rearrange my characters here. And we're just about done. Add a little bit more shimmer here to the rainbow and to the sentiment. And then the last thing that I wanted to do to this card was, as I took some Morning Dew crystal drops and I kind of dabbed them around the scene, because when they dry clear, so they look like rain droplets. And this just adds to that whole rainy scene. I love the way that this looked. I added a little bit on the little girl's umbrella. I thought about adding them on the characters themselves, but I wasn't really brave enough for that quite yet. But I did add a few onto her umbrella, and I like the way that that looked as well. And that will finish up this card for today. I want to thank you guys for hanging in there with me. I know this was a long one, but I really wanted to share the entire process with you because it turned out so great. I love the way that this looked. This was my first time using this scene background and this sentiment. This is my first kind of rainy day scene, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, and if you want to see more from my channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe as well as the little notification bell so you don't miss out on any more videos here at my channel. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye!